On a humid evening, a reckless dare in front of a crowded room forces a young waitress to prove she can cook like a chef. With no degree, armed only with her grandmother's recipes, she faces sharp knives, poisoned glares, and secrets from the owner that could change everything, or destroy them both. Chapter 1. The rain pounded furiously against the windows of the Golden Gate Grill that November afternoon, while the aroma of fresh rosemary and barbecue sauce mixed with the buzz of patrons filling every table. Between the clatter of plates and the murmur of conversations, 24-year-old Hope Miller balanced a heavy tray, her hands trembling slightly. Her eyes, green like an emerald of the Pacific Northwest, reflected a mixture of determination and vulnerability that made her special, though she didn't know it. Small in stature but great in dignity, she had the natural sweetness of those who have learned to smile in spite of pain. Her light brown hair, always pulled back in a practical ponytail, framed a face with delicate cheekbones and a smile that, though frequent, couldn't completely hide the sadness she held in her soul. Hope had arrived in the city from a small town in Oregon after her mother's death, carrying little more than an old suitcase, her grandmother's cookbook, and a dream that seemed to fade a little more each day: to become a chef. She worked 12 hours a day as a waitress, sent half of her salary to her sick father, and saved every penny she could to one day be able to study culinary arts. The restaurant's owner, 32-year-old Alex Watson, watched from his usual table, where he reviewed invoices with a furrowed brow. Tall, with an athletic build that hinted at his years of swimming, he had lightly tanned skin from the San Francisco sun, blue eyes like the Pacific Ocean, and a square jaw that gave him an air of natural authority. His dark hair always perfectly slicked back, and his custom suit spoke of money, but there was something in his gaze that suggested that money had come at a very high price. Alex had inherited a chain of restaurants from his father, but after a brutal betrayal by his best friend and business partner, who had run off with half his money and his fiancée 2 years prior, he had become distrustful, cold, and incapable of letting anyone get too close to his heart. His employees feared him more than they respected him, and he preferred to keep it that way. That night everything changed with a single sentence that would echo in Hope's ears for months. An important client, the renowned food critic Charles Morgan, had ordered the house's signature dish, a BBQ pulled pork sandwich. When Hope arrived to serve him, the man took a bite, made a face of disgust, and raised his voice loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "This barbecue sauce tastes like cardboard. Who the hell is cooking back there? My 90-year-old grandma makes a better sauce than this." Silence took over the place. Hope felt the color rise to her face, not from shame but from indignation. She knew that dish better than anyone. She had seen Chef Paul prepare it that morning, a man who cooked more out of routine than passion, and indeed it was bland, soulless. Alex got up from his table with cat-like movements, his presence filling the space as he approached. His blue eyes first locked on the critic, then on Hope, who held the tray with knuckles white from tension. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Mr. Morgan," Alex said in a controlled but firm voice. "However," and here his eyes turned directly to Hope, with an intensity that made her feel as if she were the only person in the restaurant, "if you can prepare this dish the way it should be, the way it's truly made, I promise not only to hire you as a chef, but to give you the opportunity to prove that talent doesn't need a university degree." The entire restaurant held its breath. Hope felt the world stop. Alex's words sounded like a mix of challenge and opportunity, but also public humiliation. Was he making fun of her, the little waitress from Oregon cooking for a food critic? Her green eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. There were two options: run away and hide in the bathroom to cry away her humiliation, or grab the bull by the horns and prove that the hands that had learned to cook alongside her grandmother hadn't forgotten the magic. "I accept," she whispered, and then, raising her voice with a determination that surprised herself, she repeated, "I accept your challenge, Mr. Watson." Alex smiled for the first time in months, a small but genuine smile that briefly lit up his serious features. "The kitchen is at your disposal, Miss Miller. 30 minutes. Hope nodded, put the tray down on the nearest table, and walked toward the kitchen with a firm step, though inside she felt as if she were walking toward her own execution. As she passed Alex, he murmured low enough for only her to hear, "Don't let anyone underestimate you. I won't make that mistake again." The restaurant kitchen was a different world, gleaming stainless steel, professional stoves, and the residual aroma of hundreds of meals prepared. Paul the chef looked at her with a mixture of surprise and disdain. "You? A waitress is going to cook for Morgan? This is going to be a disaster," he muttered, but he stepped aside when he saw the determination in Hope's eyes. She closed her eyes for a moment, and remembered the wrinkled hands of her grandmother Rose, teaching her that a good sauce wasn't just a recipe, but a prayer made with one's hands. "Sweetheart," she would say, "the secret isn't in the recipe, it's in the love you cook with. The peppers must be toasted until they sing, the chocolate must melt like a sigh, and the spices must mix as if they were old friends reuniting." For the next 30 minutes, Hope was transformed. Her hands moved with a grace and certainty that surprised even Paul. She toasted smoked peppers, ancho chilies, and chipotle peppers until the aroma filled the entire kitchen. She ground pecans, peanuts, and sesame seeds with a nun's patience. She melted baking chocolate with the precision of a goldsmith. As she cooked, a small crowd had gathered at the kitchen door. Alex watched from the frame, his arms crossed, but his expression had changed from skepticism to something close to admiration. There was something hypnotic in the way she worked, as if she were performing an ancient dance. With 5 minutes to go, Hope tasted the sauce. Perfect. Rich, complex, with that depth of flavor that can only be achieved when every ingredient finds its exact place in the symphony. She served the pulled pork bathed in that silky dark sauce, decorated the plate with toasted sesame seeds and a touch of chopped white onion. She walked back to the dining room with the plate in her hands, feeling as if she were carrying not just food, but her entire history, her dreams, and her grandmother's memory. Charles Morgan waited for her with his arms crossed, clearly skeptical. The critic took his fork, cut a piece of pulled pork, and brought it to his mouth. He chewed slowly, his eyes closed, and for a moment that seemed eternal. He said nothing. Then his eyes opened, and a genuine smile formed on his face. "Miss, this is extraordinary. This sauce has soul. It's been years since I've tasted anything like this," he said. And then, turning to Alex, "Hire this woman immediately, or I will." The entire restaurant erupted in applause. Hope felt her legs tremble, but this time not from nerves, but from an emotion so intense it almost knocked her over. She had won. She had proven her worth. Alex walked up to her, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw something like respect in his blue eyes. "Welcome to the team, Chef Miller," he said, extending his hand. When their hands touched, Hope felt an electric shock that had nothing to do with culinary triumph. Alex felt it too, because he withdrew his hand a little faster than necessary. "We start tomorrow at 6 in the morning," he added, regaining his professional tone. "Paul will show you everything you need to know about the kitchen's operation." That night, Hope returned to her small loft downtown, walking on a cloud. She had achieved what she had dreamed of for years, a real opportunity to cook professionally. But there was something else, something she didn't dare to name, related to the way Alex had looked at her during those 30 minutes in the kitchen. However, what Hope didn't know was that she had just entered a world far more complicated than she imagined, and that Alex Watson, the man who had given her the opportunity of a lifetime, held secrets that could change everything between them. Chapter 2. Hope's first days in the kitchen of the Golden Gate Grill were like walking through an emotional minefield. Paul, the chef who had been displaced from his position of absolute authority, greeted her with a tense smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I hope you know what you've gotten yourself into, kid," he said on the first day, as he showed her where the spices were. "It's one thing to impress for a single night. It's another entirely to maintain that level every day." Hope, dressed in her new chef's uniform that was slightly too big for her, nodded with determination. Her green eyes shone with a mixture of nervousness and excitement that made her look even younger than her 24 years. "I understand, Chef Paul. I'm here to learn and do my best." However, what really made Hope nervous wasn't Paul or the demands of a professional kitchen. It was Alex's constant presence. He had developed a habit of casually passing through the kitchen several times a day. Each time he appeared, she managed to drop something, cut herself with a knife, or mix up ingredients as if it were the first time she had ever cooked in her life. The second week, while preparing lunch, Hope was concentrating on her special sauce when she felt a presence behind her. She knew immediately it was Alex without having to turn around. His cologne, a subtle blend of cedar and bergamot, was already familiar to her. "How are things going, Chef Miller?" he asked, leaning in slightly to see what she was preparing. The problem was that Hope was so startled by his voice being so close that she spun around abruptly, hitting the pan where garlic was browning with her elbow. Hot oil splattered, and a few drops landed on the sleeve of Alex's white shirt. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, Mr. Watson," Hope exclaimed, grabbing a rag and rushing to wipe the spot, not realizing she was completely invading his personal space. Alex stood motionless as she rubbed the fabric of his shirt, concentrating on getting the stain out. He could smell her shampoo, something fruity and sweet that contrasted with the intense aromas of the kitchen, and feel the warmth of her hands through the fabric. It was the first time in 2 years that a woman had touched him, even accidentally, and the sensation unnerved him more than he wanted to admit. "Hope," he murmured, using her first name instead of the formal Chef Miller. She looked up and realized how close they were. Her green eyes met his blue ones, and for a moment the bustling kitchen disappeared. They were so close that she could see the small lines around his eyes, the tiny scar on his left eyebrow that gave him a slightly dangerous air. The stain, I wanted to," she stammered, but didn't move. Neither did Alex. There was something magnetic in those green eyes that had him completely hypnotized. He found himself studying her face as if it were the first time he had ever seen her, the tiny freckles that scattered across her nose, the way her lips parted slightly when she was nervous, the way her cheeks flushed when he looked directly at her. "The stain doesn't matter," he murmured, his voice huskier than usual. It was Paul who snapped them out of their trance with a loud cough. "Excuse the interruption, but we have an order for 50 people at 2 o'clock, he said with a malicious smile that both of them pretended not to notice. Hope pulled away so quickly she almost tripped over her own feet, and Alex headed for the door, muttering something about invoices to review. From that day on, the tension between them became palpable. Alex began to find increasingly elaborate excuses to be in the kitchen, checking the temperature of the refrigerators, reviewing the wine inventory, supervising the cleaning of the stoves. Hope, for her part, became a bundle of nerves every time he appeared. The situation came to a head one rainy December afternoon. The restaurant was relatively quiet, and Hope took the opportunity to experiment with a new Thanksgiving-style casserole she had been perfecting. She was so focused on mixing the homemade gravy that she didn't realize Alex had entered until he spoke. "That smells incredible. Is that homemade gravy?" This time, Hope wasn't startled. She had been subconsciously expecting his visit. She turned to him with a genuine smile that made something stir in Alex's chest. "Yes, it's my grandmother's recipe. The seasonal ingredients are perfect for this time of year," she replied, and then, with a boldness that surprised even herself, she added, "Would you like to try it?" Alex came closer, and this time it was he who invaded her personal space. He stood right behind her, so close that Hope could feel his breath on her neck when he leaned in to look at the mixture. "May I?" he asked, pointing to the spoon. Hope nodded, took a clean spoon, and filled it with gravy. When she offered it to him, their fingers briefly brushed as he took the spoon, and they both felt that same electric shock from the first time. Alex tried the gravy, closed his eyes, and smiled. A real smile, not the professional one he used with clients and employees. "It's perfect, sweet but not cloying, creamy but with texture. Your grandmother was an artist." "She was," Hope responded softly. "She passed away right before I came to San Francisco. She always said that the kitchen was the heart of the home, and that when a woman cooked with love, that love was passed on to whoever ate the food." Alex opened his eyes and looked at her with an intensity that made Hope's cheeks feel warm. "Do you cook with love, Hope?" The question was simple, but they both knew there was something deeper behind it. Hope looked him directly in the eyes, feeling a courage she didn't know she possessed. "Always," she replied. "Especially when it's for someone special." The moment was charged with a tension so intense that they both felt the air had become thick. Alex took one more step closer, until they were close enough that he could count her eyelashes. "Hope, he began, but stopped when they heard approaching footsteps. Maggie, one of the older waitresses, entered the kitchen looking for water, but she stopped dead in her tracks when she saw them so close. Her expression of surprise quickly transformed into a knowing smile. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt anything important," she said in a teasing tone, before quickly leaving. Alex immediately backed away, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration that Hope was beginning to recognize. I have work to do," he muttered, and left the kitchen without looking back. Hope was left alone, her heart pounding so hard she was sure the entire kitchen could hear it. What had happened between them wasn't just a culinary tasting. It had been something much more dangerous and exciting. That night, Hope couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in her bed, remembering every detail of the encounter, the way Alex had looked at her, the intensity in his voice when he asked if she cooked with love, the way he had been about to say something before they were interrupted. The next day, Alex didn't show up in the kitchen. Not the next day, or the day after that. Hope told herself it was better this way. That distance was the most professional thing. But she couldn't deny that she missed him. On Friday of that week, Paul approached her with a serious expression. "Hope, I need to tell you something. Alex is a good boss, but he's complicated. He was in a relationship a couple of years ago that ended very badly. His fiancée left with his best friend and business partner, taking half of the business's money. Since then, he hasn't trusted anyone, especially women." Hope felt a pang in her chest upon hearing this. Suddenly Alex's sudden distance made sense. "Why are you telling me this, Chef Paul?" Paul sighed. "Because I've seen the way you two look at each other, and because he hasn't been the same since you got here. More relaxed, less tense, but also more conflicted. I just wanted you to know what ground you're walking on." That afternoon, as Hope was cleaning her workstation, Alex finally appeared, but he wasn't the same man who had been about to kiss her a few days before. This Alex had a tense jaw, cold eyes, and a professional distance that hurt more than Hope wanted to admit. "Chef Miller, I need to speak with you," he said formally. Hope felt a knot in her stomach, but she nodded. "On Monday, we have a special dinner for some important investors. I need you to prepare a 5-course tasting menu. Can you do it?" "Of course, Mr. Watson," she replied, deciding to play his professional coldness game. "Perfect. I'll send you the details of the event in writing." Alex turned to leave, but something in him couldn't just let it go. He stopped at the door, and without turning around added, "Hope, what happened the other day? It was a mistake. It can't happen again. The relationship between employer and employee must remain strictly professional." The words hit Hope like a bucket of cold water. She straightened up, raised her chin with the dignity she had inherited from her grandmother, and replied in a firm voice, "Understood perfectly, Mr. Watson. Don't worry, it won't happen again." When Alex left, Hope allowed herself 5 minutes to feel the disappointment and pain. Then she washed her hands, dried her eyes, and got to work on the most spectacular menu she could create. If Alex wanted professionalism, she would give it to him. But she would also show him that she was much more than a romantic distraction. Chapter 3. Monday arrived with that characteristic San Francisco fog that makes everything feel heavier, including hearts. Hope had spent the weekend designing every detail of the tasting menu, turning her small kitchen into a culinary laboratory where she tasted, adjusted, and perfected each dish until it was worthy of her professional pride and wounded dignity. The menu she had created was a love letter to American regional cuisine. It would start with a shrimp cocktail with mango and chipotle, followed by a deconstructed cheddar soup with a smoked paprika foam, continue with a pulled pork sandwich with a tangy barbecue sauce, then a prime rib with a rich gravy, and end with a 3-layer cake with cinnamon coffee. Each dish had a personal story. The shrimp cocktail recalled summers in Oregon when she helped her fisherman uncle. The cheddar soup was her mother's favorite dish. The pulled pork sandwich had been the first complex dish she learned from her grandmother. The prime rib with gravy was her own modern interpretation of a family recipe, and the 3-layer cake evoked Sunday family afternoons. When she arrived at the restaurant that morning, she found Alex already there, checking every detail of the setup. He wore a dark grey suit that enhanced his blue eyes and had his hair perfectly slicked back. He looked powerful, successful, and completely out of reach. "Good morning, Chef Miller," he greeted without looking up from his papers. "I hope everything is ready for tonight." "Good morning, Mr. Watson. Everything is under control," Hope replied in a professional voice, although inside she felt as if she were walking on broken glass. Throughout the day, they worked in the same space, maintaining professional distance. Alex supervised the arrangement of the main dining room, which had been specially decorated for the occasion with white flowers and candles that created an elegant but warm atmosphere. Hope commanded the kitchen with an efficiency that impressed even Paul, who had decided to fully support her after seeing her determination. "That girl has guts," Paul muttered to Maggie as they watched Hope direct the kitchen assistants with the precision of an orchestra conductor, "and talent to spare." At 7 in the evening, the guests began to arrive. Hope discreetly watched them from the kitchen door, elegant men and women, clearly accustomed to luxury and fine dining. In the center of the group was a woman who stood out not only for her beauty, but for the way Alex reacted when he saw her enter. Victoria Hayes was 30 years old, with perfectly styled blonde hair, honey-colored eyes, and she wore a black dress that cost more than 3 months of Hope's salary. But what really caught Hope's attention was the way Alex's jaw tightened when he saw her, and how his hands clenched into fists for a moment before he regained his professional composure. "Alex," Victoria purred as she approached, "how wonderful to see you again. I hope there are no hard feelings." "Victoria," he replied in a controlled voice, "I didn't know you were coming. Didn't Richard tell you? I'm now a partner in the investment firm. Business is business, right? Nothing personal." Hope felt her stomach churn. She didn't need anyone to tell her who this woman was. Everything in Alex's body language, in the tension he radiated, and in Victoria's fake smile screamed, "This is the woman who betrayed me." Richard Sterling, who had arrived with Victoria, was exactly what Hope had imagined. Obviously handsome, with blonde hair and an easy smile, the kind of man who inspires confidence immediately, but who probably betrays it just as quickly. "Brother," Richard said, patting Alex's shoulder as if they were old friends, "I hope we've put our differences behind us. The past is the past, isn't it?" Alex smiled, but Hope could see it was the smile of a predator showing its teeth. "Of course, Richard. Tonight is just business." During dinner, Hope outdid herself. Every dish came out perfectly, presented with an elegance that made the guests murmur words of appreciation. From the kitchen she could hear the complimentary comments, the exclamations of surprise and satisfaction. However, her attention was divided between the kitchen and the dining room, where she could see Alex interacting with his guests, especially with Victoria, who seemed determined to sit as close to him as possible and touch his arm every time she spoke. When it was time for the main course, the prime rib with rich gravy, Hope decided to bring it out personally. It was risky to leave the kitchen, but she needed to see what was happening up close. "Good evening," she said as she approached the main table with a tray. "I'm Chef Hope Miller, and tonight I have had the honor of preparing this menu, especially for you." The diners received her politely. Some even stood up to greet her. Victoria evaluated her from head to toe with a look that seemed to be calculating the price of everything she was wearing. "Miller?" Victoria asked with false sweetness. "And where did you study cooking, dear?" Hope felt the blow, but she maintained her composure. "I learned in my grandmother's kitchen in Oregon, Mom. Sometimes the best lessons don't come from schools, but from the heart." "How quaint," Victoria replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Alex intervened in a tense voice. "Chef Miller is extraordinarily talented. Her barbecue sauce impressed Charles Morgan a few weeks ago." "Charles Morgan!" exclaimed one of the guests. "That man is impossible to impress." "Congratulations, Chef." Hope smiled gratefully, but she noticed how Victoria was squeezing her wine glass harder than necessary. When she returned to the kitchen, Hope felt victorious but uneasy. There was something in the dynamic between Alex, Victoria, and Richard that made her nervous, as if she were witnessing the initial moves of a very dangerous chess match. An hour later, while preparing dessert, Maggie burst into the kitchen with a worried look on her face. "Hope, I think you should know something. I heard that blonde woman talking on the phone in the bathroom. She was saying something about getting Alex to sell and that the country girl chef wasn't part of the plan, but they could use her." Hope felt her blood run cold. "Are you sure you heard that?" "Completely. And there's more." Richard was talking to other guests about how this restaurant would be perfect to turn into a franchise, that the local charm could be easily replicated. At that moment, Hope understood everything. This wasn't an innocent investment dinner. It was an ambush. Victoria and Richard had come to finish what they started 2 years ago, destroy Alex, but this time from the inside, buying his business and stripping him of everything he had built. Without a second thought, Hope took off her apron and left the restaurant through the back door. She needed fresh air and a moment to process what she had just discovered. She walked to the small garden behind the building, where Alex had set up a few tables for employees to rest. It was there that she found him, standing under the dim light of a lamppost, smoking a cigarette with hands that trembled slightly. He looked completely different from the controlled and professional man inside. He looked vulnerable, hurt, and completely human. "Alex?" she murmured softly. He turned around, and when he saw her, his expression transformed into a mixture of surprise, relief, and something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. "Hope, what are you doing out here? You should be inside, receiving the praise you deserve." "I came to make sure you were okay," she replied, approaching slowly. "I saw how you reacted when she arrived." Alex threw the cigarette away and crushed it with his foot. When he looked up, his blue eyes were filled with a sadness so deep that Hope felt her heart break. "Victoria was my fiancée. Richard was my best friend since childhood. I thought I knew them, that I could trust them." His voice cracked slightly. "I was wrong." Hope took another step toward him, until they were close enough for her to see the lines of fatigue around his eyes. "Alex, I think you should know something about tonight." But before she could continue, the back door opened and Victoria appeared, as if she had been looking for them. "Alex, darling, we were looking for you. The guests want to know more details about your establishment." Her gaze turned to Hope with barely concealed contempt. "And you, Chef, I think you should be in the kitchen, shouldn't you? Employees shouldn't mix with important guests." Hope felt her blood boil, but before she could respond, Alex straightened up, and his voice cut through the air like a knife. "Hope isn't just an employee, Victoria. She's the head chef of this restaurant and deserves the same respect as anyone else here." Victoria laughed, a cold and calculated sound. "How sweet. Did you fall for the help, Alex? You were always too sentimental." The comment was like a slap to them both. Hope felt humiliated to her bones, but more than that, she saw how Alex tensed completely, as if Victoria had hit the exact point she knew would hurt him the most. Come on, Alex, Victoria continued, approaching him with feline movements. You know that she and you are from completely different worlds. Do you really think a country girl with no education can understand your world, your lifestyle? Richard and I have a very generous proposal to buy your restaurant. You could start over, get away from unnecessary complications. Hope felt every word was a dagger aimed directly at her heart, but what hurt the most was the expression on Alex's face. For a moment, very briefly, she saw doubt in his eyes. Doubt about her, about what was between them, about whether Victoria was right. That moment of hesitation was enough for Hope to understand everything. Alex could defend her professionally. He could recognize her talent. He could even feel something for her. But deep down, a part of him still believed that Victoria was right. They were from different worlds. "Excuse me," Hope said in a controlled voice, though inside she was falling apart. "I think I should get back to the kitchen." "You're right, Miss Hayes. Employees shouldn't mix with important guests." She turned around and walked toward the door with her head held high, but she heard Alex's voice behind her. "Hope, wait. Don't worry, Mr. Watson," she replied without turning around. "Everything is perfectly clear." That night, after all the guests had left and after cleaning every plate, every glass and every surface in the kitchen, Hope sat alone at her workstation and finally allowed herself to cry. She wasn't just crying because of the humiliation or Victoria's cruel words. She was crying because she had seen something in Alex's eyes that confirmed her worst fears, that maybe, just maybe, he really believed she wasn't enough for his world. But as she cried, something else was kindling inside her, a fierce determination, the same one she had inherited from generations of strong women who had known how to survive and thrive in spite of everything. If Alex couldn't see her true worth, she would show him. And if Victoria and Richard thought they could destroy both him and her, they would find that they had severely underestimated the country girl with no education. Chapter 4. The days following the dinner of humiliation passed in a thick fog for Hope. She arrived at the restaurant before dawn and left after midnight, pouring all her wounded energy into perfecting every dish, creating new recipes, and running the kitchen with an efficiency that bordered on obsession. Alex, for his part, had returned to his cold and distant demeanor, but now there was something different in his eyes when he looked at her. It wasn't contempt or condescension, but something like remorse mixed with confusion. Several employees noticed that he no longer smiled at all, and that he had started smoking again, a habit he had quit months ago. On Wednesday of that week, Hope was preparing a new version of stuffed bell peppers when Paul approached with a worried expression. "Sweetheart, I need to talk to you. Come here." Hope followed him to the small office that Paul used to plan menus. Once inside, he closed the door and turned to her seriously. "Hope, I've been in this business for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of things. What happened the other night was a trap." "What do you mean?" Hope asked, although she suspected where the conversation was going. "That woman, Victoria, and her friend Richard, they didn't come to invest. They came to destroy. I overheard a phone conversation Richard was having. They're planning to buy the restaurant for below its real value by convincing Alex that the business isn't profitable." Hope felt her stomach shrink. How are they going to do that? They're going to sabotage the restaurant from the inside. Fake reviews, problems with suppliers, surprise inspections, anything they can do to make the place look like it's in decline. Paul paused and looked her directly in the eyes. "And they're going to use you as part of their strategy." "Me? How?" "They're going to make it seem like hiring a chef with no formal degree was a mistake, that Alex is making emotional decisions instead of professional ones, that he's getting soft." Hope sat heavily in the nearest chair. It all made sense now. Victoria's comments about her education, the way she had tried to separate her from Alex, the way she had sowed doubt about their professional relationship. "Paul, do you think Alex knows what they're planning?" Paul sighed and sat down across from her. "I think he suspects it, but he's too hurt and confused to see clearly. That woman destroyed him 2 years ago, and now she's back, right when he was starting to, when he was starting to be happy again." "Happy?" Hope looked up, surprised. "Oh, sweetheart, have you really not noticed? That man has been different since you got here. More relaxed, more human. I've worked for him since he opened this place, and I've never seen him smile as much as in the last few months." Paul leaned forward. "But now he's scared. Scared to trust again. Scared of being betrayed again." Hope felt a mixture of sadness and determination growing in her chest. "What can I do? He's already decided we're from different worlds. You can show him he's wrong, but not in the way he expects." Paul smiled. "I have an idea, but it's going to require you to trust me and be braver than you've ever been in your life." 2 hours later, Hope was in front of the office computer, writing an email that would change everything. Paul had explained his plan. They were going to organize a charity culinary event at the restaurant, inviting all the important food critics from San Francisco, recognized chefs from the city, and influential people from the American culinary world. But Paul, Hope had protested, that's exactly what Victoria and Richard want, an opportunity to publicly humiliate me. Exactly, Paul had smiled, but not if we give them a surprise they don't expect. The plan was audacious to the point of madness. Hope would not only cook, but she would also give a presentation on traditional American regional cuisine and its contemporary evolution. She would talk about the importance of preserving family recipes while embracing innovation. And most importantly, she would invite her grandmother, Ruth Miller, the younger sister of her late grandmother Rose, who was a legendary cook in Oregon and had been invited several times to cook for the President of the United States. My grandmother Ruth, Hope's eyes widened. Paul, she's 80 years old and has never left Oregon. Exactly why it'll be perfect. Do you know what will happen when the food critics of San Francisco meet a true master of traditional cooking? They'll be speechless. Now, as she wrote the invitation, Hope felt a mixture of terror and excitement. She was risking everything: her job, her reputation, her heart. But for the first time since the night of the humiliation, she felt like herself again. The email she sent was simple but powerful. Dear colleagues and lovers of American regional cuisine, I have the honor of inviting you to a special event at the Golden Gate Grill, Roots and Wings, a tribute to American regional cuisine. It will be a celebration of our culinary traditions and their contemporary evolution. As the restaurant's head chef, I will share dishes that represent a journey from the family kitchens of Oregon to modern interpretations that honor our past while embracing the future. I will have the privilege of being accompanied by master cook Ruth Miller, a recognized traditional cook from Oregon, who will share the wisdom of generations of women who have guarded the secrets of our cooking. The event will be a fundraiser, and all proceeds will be donated to the National Heritage Cooks Foundation. I hope to see you this Saturday at 7 p.m. With respect and culinary passion, Chef Hope Miller. When Alex arrived at the restaurant that afternoon and found out about the event, his reaction was exactly what Hope had expected and feared. What do you mean you organized an event without consulting me? He roared, storming into the kitchen with a face red with fury. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Hope, who was chopping onions for that night's dinner, didn't look up from her cutting board. Her voice was calm but firm as she replied, I organized a culinary event at the restaurant where I work as head chef. It's part of my responsibilities to promote the establishment. That's not the point. Alex walked closer until he was standing directly in front of her station. You can't make decisions like that without authorization. And you definitely can't compromise the reputation of the restaurant by inviting critics when... He stopped abruptly, but Hope finished the sentence for him. When the head chef is a country girl with no formal education, is that it? The silence that followed was so tense that Paul and the other kitchen assistants suddenly found urgent things to do at the other end of the kitchen. Hope finally looked up and stared directly at Alex. Her green eyes shone with an intensity he had never seen before, a mixture of pain, determination, and something close to disappointment. Alex, let me be very clear with you. I have worked in this restaurant for months. I have raised the quality of the food. I have attracted new clients, and I have given everything I have for this place. If after all that you still think I'm not good enough to represent this restaurant, then fire me right now. Her voice cracked slightly on the last sentence, but she quickly recovered. But if you fire me, do it for real professional reasons, not because Victoria Hayes convinced you that someone like me doesn't deserve to be in your world. Alex remained silent, but Hope could see something moving behind his blue eyes. Pain, confusion, and maybe the beginning of a realization he had been avoiding. Hope, it's not that, he began in a softer voice. It's not what? She interrupted him. It's not that you think I'm inferior. It's not that you think you made a mistake giving me a chance. Because that night when Victoria said we were from different worlds, I saw you hesitate. I saw that a part of you believed she was right. Alex closed his eyes and ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Hope had learned to recognize as his way of dealing with emotions he didn't know how to handle. Hope, my past, what they did to me, it's complicated. Everyone has a complicated past, Alex, but that doesn't give you the right to hurt other people for the mistakes others made against you. Hope took off her apron and carefully hung it on its hook. When she turned to him, there was a dignity in her posture that left him speechless. The event is this Saturday. You can cancel it if you want, but if you do, you're also canceling my job here. Because I won't work for someone who doesn't trust me, who doesn't respect my talent, and who allows his ex-fiancée to dictate who does or doesn't deserve to be in his life. She left the kitchen, leaving Alex standing alone amid the aromas of spices and the echo of words that hit him like direct punches to the heart. That night, Alex couldn't sleep. He walked around his apartment, a luxurious suite on the 20th floor of a modern building, but he felt more alone than ever. Hope's words echoed in his head, mixing with memories from the last few months. He remembered the first time he saw her, that small, determined woman who had accepted his challenge without knowing if she would emerge victorious or humiliated. He remembered how her eyes lit up when she talked about cooking, the genuine passion she put into every dish, the way she treated every employee with respect and kindness. He also remembered the intimate moments they had shared, the afternoon with the gravy when they were so close to kissing, the glances that lingered longer than professionally appropriate, the way she worried about him when she saw he was stressed. And then he remembered the night of the dinner with Victoria, and he realized something that filled him with shame. He had allowed his ex-fiancée's comments to sow doubt about Hope, not because he believed she was right, but because he was scared. Scared to trust again, scared to love again, scared that if he allowed himself to feel something real for Hope, she would also betray him as Victoria had. But by allowing that fear to govern his actions, he had done exactly what Hope had said. He had hurt an innocent person for the mistakes others had made against him. On Friday morning, Alex arrived at the restaurant determined to talk to Hope and apologize, but when he entered the kitchen, he found a surprise he wasn't expecting. An older woman, small but with an imposing presence, was standing by the stove, directing the preparation of breakfast with the authority of someone who had spent decades perfecting her art. She had her grey hair pulled back in a neat bun, wore a hand-embroidered apron, and her eyes, the same jade green as Hope's, shone with intelligence and wisdom. "You must be Alex," the woman said, without turning to look at him, as if she had sensed his presence. "I'm Ruth Miller, Hope's grandmother, and I think you and I need to have a conversation." Chapter 5. Ruth Miller was not a woman who wasted time with unnecessary pleasantries. At 80 years old, she had raised 10 children, survived the deaths of 2 husbands, fed thousands of people throughout her life, and had learned to read people with the same precision with which she measured spices for her sauces. "Son," she said to Alex while continuing to stir a green chili sauce that filled the kitchen with aromas that immediately transported him back to his childhood, "my granddaughter told me what happened here, and I have to tell you that you're making the biggest mistake of your life." Alex, who had never allowed any employee or employee's family member to speak to him that way, found himself nodding and moving closer to listen better. There was something about that woman's presence that commanded immediate respect. "Mrs. Miller, Ruth interrupted him, raising a small but authoritative hand. "First you listen, then you speak. It's the #1 rule for understanding women, and you clearly need to learn it." Despite everything, Alex felt a smile threaten to appear on his lips. It had been years since anyone had spoken to him as if he were a child in need of guidance. Ruth put down the spoon, wiped her hands on her apron, and turned to look at him directly. Her green eyes, so similar to Hope's, but filled with decades of experience, examined him as if she could see straight into his soul. "That girl," she said, obviously referring to Hope, "has been in love with you since the 2nd month she got here, and you with her since the 3rd week. Anyone with eyes can see it." Alex opened his mouth to protest, but Ruth continued without giving him a chance. "The problem is that you are both so stubborn and proud that you'd rather suffer than admit what you feel. She because she thinks she doesn't deserve someone like you, and you because you're afraid of being hurt again." Ruth's words hit Alex as if she had read a book about his life that he didn't even know he had written himself. "But there's something my granddaughter doesn't know," Ruth continued, and her voice became softer, sadder, "and something you don't know about her either." Ruth walked to a chair and sat down slowly, her age showing for the first time in her movements. She gestured for Alex to sit across from her. 6 years ago, when Hope was 18, she was engaged to a boy from our town. Michael, his name was. A good boy, hard-working, from a well-known family. Hope loved him with all her heart. Alex felt an unexpected pang of jealousy, but he remained silent. The wedding was planned for after the harvest. Hope had started planning her life. She would help Michael with his small carpentry business. They would have children. They would live in the town as our families had for generations. Ruth paused, as if it pained her to continue the story. 2 weeks before the wedding, Michael left town. He didn't say anything, didn't leave a letter, nothing. He just disappeared. Hope waited for him for months, thinking he had had an accident, that he would come back. Alex felt his stomach tighten, anticipating what was coming. A year later, we found out the truth. Michael had gone to another state with Hope's older sister, Carla. They got married there and had a child. Carla never came back, never apologized, never explained why she betrayed her younger sister like that. The silence in the kitchen was so deep that Alex could hear his own heart beating. Hope never trusted love again after that. She became independent, strong, determined not to need anyone. When her mother died, she came here to San Francisco, not only looking for a job, but fleeing the memories of a betrayal that scarred her forever. Ruth leaned forward and took Alex's hands in hers. Small, wrinkled hands, but surprisingly strong. That girl learned to protect her heart by building walls so high that not even she can see over them. But with you, for the first time in 6 years, those walls began to crumble. For the first time, she started to shine again, to laugh, to dream of a future that included another person. Alex felt something stir in his chest, a mixture of understanding, remorse, and something deeper he didn't dare to name. "Why are you telling me this, Mrs. Miller?" "Because when my granddaughter called me to tell me what had happened with that blonde woman the other night, I heard the same pain in her voice that I heard 6 years ago when Michael betrayed her. And because if you don't do something to fix it, she's going to close her heart again, but this time forever." Ruth let go of his hands and stood up, smoothing her apron. "And now I'm going to tell you a secret that not even Hope fully knows." Alex looked at her with curiosity and apprehension. "The night she prepared that barbecue sauce that impressed the critic, do you know why it turned out so perfect?" "Because she's a great cook," Alex replied automatically. Ruth smiled, but there was sadness in her smile. "Because that night marked exactly 6 years since Michael abandoned her. She was cooking not only to impress you, but to prove to herself that she was worth it, that she deserved to be loved, that she wasn't flawed or insufficient as Michael had made her feel." Alex felt his throat tighten. "Every dish that girl has prepared in this restaurant has been filled with love, with hope, with her desire to build something beautiful with you. And the other night, when that woman said you were from different worlds, when you hesitated even for a second, you confirmed her worst fears, that maybe Michael was right, that maybe she wasn't enough to be loved." At that moment, Hope entered the kitchen carrying boxes of fresh vegetables. Seeing her grandmother and Alex sitting together in serious conversation, she stopped at the door. "Grandma, is everything okay?" Ruth stood up and walked to her granddaughter, taking her hands just as she had with Alex. "Sweetheart, I just told Alex about Michael." Hope turned pale. "Grandma, why?" "Because secrets are like poisonous weeds, sweetheart. If you don't pull them out by the root, they contaminate the entire garden." Hope looked at Alex, who had stood up and was watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. There was pain in his eyes, but also something like understanding. "Hope," he said softly, "I also have secrets you need to know." Ruth, with the wisdom of someone who had lived long enough to recognize decisive moments, headed for the door. "I'll leave you two alone, but remember, broken hearts can be healed, but only if they are brave enough to open up again." When they were left alone, Alex and Hope looked at each other across the kitchen as if there were a chasm between them. Finally, he broke the silence. "Is it true? What your grandmother told me about Michael?" Hope nodded, feeling her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I don't like talking about it. It was very humiliating." Alex walked toward her until they were close enough for her to see the emotions battling in his blue eyes. "Hope, the night Victoria came to the restaurant, when she said we were from different worlds." "You're right," I hesitated, "but I didn't doubt you or your worth. I doubted myself." Hope looked at him with confusion. "I don't understand." Alex took a deep breath as if he were about to jump off a cliff. "Victoria didn't just leave with Richard and half my money. She left because she was pregnant." Hope felt her heart stop. "She was pregnant with my son, or so I believed for 2 years. Alex's voice cracked slightly. "3 months ago I found out the truth. The child was never mine. It was Richard's from before she and I even got engaged. Her entire relationship was a lie to get access to my money and my contacts." Hope felt her eyes fill with tears, not for herself, but for the pain she could see on Alex's face. "Alex." "Hope, that night, when Victoria suggested that you and I were from different worlds, I didn't doubt you. I doubted myself. I doubted my ability to judge people. I doubted if I deserved something real after having been so blind." He took one more step closer. "I was afraid that if I allowed myself to love you, I would somehow contaminate you with my mistakes." The tears that Hope had been holding back finally began to roll down her cheeks. "We're both so silly," she whispered. "The biggest fools in the world," he agreed, raising a hand to gently wipe her tears. "Alex, ever since Michael, I haven't been able to," she began. "I know. Your grandmother explained it to me. And I want you to know that every day since you got here, every conversation, every smile, every dish you've prepared has shown me how wrong Michael was. How wrong anyone is who can't see how extraordinary you are. Hope closed her eyes, allowing the words to wrap around her like a hug. What if we get hurt again, she whispered. What if we don't, he replied. What if this time we have the courage to choose love instead of fear? When Hope opened her eyes, she found Alex's waiting for her, filled with a vulnerability she had never seen before. Hope, I'm in love with you. I think I fell in love the moment you accepted my challenge that first night. And if you give me a chance, if you give us a chance, I promise I will never again allow anyone, including myself, to make you feel like you aren't enough. It was the moment of decision. Hope could protect her heart, keep the walls high, stay safe but alone, or she could do what Ruth had suggested, have the courage to open up again. I'm in love with you too, she finally whispered, and I'm very scared. Me too, he admitted, but I think it's worth the risk. Slowly, as if in a dream, Alex cradled Hope's face in his hands. Their eyes closed as he leaned toward her, and finally, after months of tension, stolen glances, and interrupted moments, their lips met. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if they were both making sure it was real, but then it deepened, charged with all the feelings they had been holding back, all the unspoken words, all the love they had been denying. When they finally separated, they were both breathing heavily. Alex rested his forehead against hers, and for the first time in years, they both felt complete. About the event tomorrow, he murmured. Yes, she replied, not pulling away from his embrace. It's going to be extraordinary, and when Victoria and Richard see who you truly are, they're going to understand that they chose the wrong enemy. Hope smiled, that radiant smile that had been absent for days. So you're not going to fire me? On the contrary, he said, kissing her softly on the forehead. I'm going to give you a raise. And a new title, executive chef and business partner. Partner? If you accept, because I want to build something with you, Hope. Not just a restaurant, but a life. At that moment, Ruth reappeared at the kitchen door, smiling as if she had known from the beginning how it would all end. Are you two done being silly? She asked with affection. I think we've just started being smart, Alex replied without letting go of Hope. Good, said Ruth, clapping, because we have an event to prepare for, and my granddaughter is going to need all the help she can get to show the world what we've always known, that she is extraordinary. But what none of them knew was that Victoria and Richard were also preparing for tomorrow's event, and they had a plan that could destroy everything before Hope and Alex's love had a chance to fully blossom. Chapter 6. Saturday dawned with that intense blue sky that you only see in San Francisco, as if the universe itself had decided to be the perfect backdrop for what was about to become the most important night of Hope's life. Since 5 in the morning, the Golden Gate Grill had been transformed into a hive of activity. Ruth directed the preparation of the traditional gravies with the precision of a general, while Hope worked on her contemporary interpretations with a concentration that bordered on meditation. Paul coordinated the rest of the team, and for the first time in months, the entire kitchen worked like a perfectly tuned symphony. Alex, dressed in a black suit that enhanced his blue eyes, supervised the setup of the main dining room, which had been decorated with marigolds, scented candles, and hand-embroidered cotton tablecloths that Ruth had brought from Oregon. The atmosphere was elegant but warm, sophisticated yet authentically American. It looks beautiful, Hope murmured, appearing by his side with her hair in a neat bun and wearing the traditional dress from Oregon that Ruth had insisted she wear, a white blouse embroidered with multicolored flowers and a wide skirt in earthy tones. You look beautiful, Alex replied, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips for a gentle kiss. Are you nervous? Terrified, she admitted with a smile, but also excited. I feel like my whole life has been preparing me for this night. At 6 in the evening, the guests began to arrive. Charles Morgan, the critic who had discovered Hope's talent, arrived accompanied by 2 colleagues from food magazines in New York City. The most recognized chefs in San Francisco appeared one after another, some with genuine curiosity, others with the professional skepticism of those who have seen too many pretentious events. But the surprise of the night came when a black car stopped in front of the restaurant and an elegant woman in her 50s got out, followed by a discreet camera crew. Isn't that Julia Jones? Paul whispered to Hope, referring to the most famous American chef internationally, known for her television shows and her restaurants in Paris and New York. Hope felt her breath catch. What is she doing here? I invited her, Ruth said, appearing behind them with a mysterious smile. Julia and I are old friends. Before she was famous, she was a hungry girl who came to my house to learn cooking secrets. I told her about my granddaughter, and she didn't hesitate to come. As they greeted the guests, Hope noticed that Victoria and Richard had still not arrived. A part of her hoped they wouldn't come, but she knew that would be too easy. They had a plan, and they weren't going to miss it. At 7 o'clock sharp, with all the guests gathered in the main dining room, Hope came out of the kitchen to give her presentation. Her hands trembled slightly, but when she saw Alex in the audience, offering her a smile full of love and confidence, she felt a calm wash over her. "Good evening, and thank you for joining us in this celebration of our cuisine," she began in a clear, firm voice. "My name is Hope Miller, and tonight I want to share with you not just food, but stories. Stories of women who have guarded culinary secrets for generations, of traditions passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, of love that is cooked over a slow fire and served with the heart." The audience was completely silent, captivated not only by her words but by the genuine passion with which she spoke. "Each dish you will taste tonight has two versions. The traditional, prepared by my grandmother Ruth Miller, a master cook from Oregon, and my contemporary interpretation, which honors those roots while embracing the possibilities of the present." It was at that moment that the restaurant doors opened, and Victoria and Richard entered, accompanied by a man whom Hope didn't recognize, but who, by his imposing presence and expensive suit, was clearly someone important. Victoria, dressed in a red dress that screamed money and power, scanned the room until she found Hope in the center of the hall. Her smile was predatory, as if she knew something the others didn't. Hope felt a chill of apprehension, but she continued with her presentation without showing any disturbance. "We will begin with the shrimp cocktail." Over the next hour, the event unfolded like a dream. Each dish was met with exclamations of pleasure and appreciation. The diners were not just eating, but experiencing a culinary journey that connected them with the essence of America. Julia Jones, after tasting Hope's prime rib with gravy, spontaneously stood up to say, "In 30 years of an international career, I have rarely tasted something that moves me so much. This young woman has extraordinary talent and a soul that is manifested in every bite." The applause was deafening. Hope felt tears of happiness running down her cheeks as she looked for Alex's gaze, who was watching her with a pride so intense it was almost tangible. But just when it seemed that the night was going to end in total triumph, Victoria stood up from her table. "Excuse me," she said in a loud, clear voice, "but I think there's something you all should know before continuing to praise this spectacle." Silence took over the room. Hope felt her blood run cold. "How you see," Victoria continued, walking to the center of the room as if it were her own stage. "It turns out that Chef Miller isn't exactly who she says she is." The man who had arrived with them, who turned out to be a health inspector Richard had bribed, also stood up. "I have documents here that show Chef Miller does not have the necessary certifications to run an establishment of this caliber. Additionally, we have found several violations of health codes that could justify the immediate closure of the restaurant." Hope felt the world collapsing around her. She knew it was a trap, that everything had been fabricated, but she also knew that in the States, bureaucracy could destroy lives regardless of the truth. "Furthermore," Victoria added in a syrupy voice, "I think it's important for you to know that the relationship between the chef and the restaurant owner goes beyond professional. Can you really trust the objectivity of an event organized by, shall we say, romantic interests?" The murmuring of the diners became uncomfortable. Hope saw how some critics began to take notes with skeptical expressions. It was at that moment that Ruth Miller stood up from her chair. At 80 years old, Ruth was not a tall or physically imposing woman, but when she spoke, her voice filled the room with an authority that made everyone fall silent immediately. "Young lady," she said, addressing Victoria, "I don't know who you are or what brought you here, but I can assure you that my granddaughter has more talent, more integrity, and more worth in her pinky finger than you have in your entire body." Julia Jones also stood up, and her voice cut through the air like a knife. "As for certifications, let me tell you something. Some of the best chefs in the world learned in their grandmother's kitchens, not in fancy schools. Talent is not certified, it is recognized, and I recognize in Hope Miller a true artist." But it was Alex who delivered the final blow. He stood up from his seat and walked to stand next to Hope, taking her hand in front of all the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in a clear, firm voice, "I want to clarify several things. First, Chef Miller has all the necessary certifications. We obtained them 2 months ago. Second, the alleged health code violations are fabrications, as you can see with the official documents I have right here. And third," he paused, looking directly at Victoria, "yes, Hope and I have a personal relationship. I am deeply in love with her, and if she accepts me, I plan to propose marriage to her tonight." The entire room erupted in a murmur of surprise and excitement. Hope felt her legs tremble, but Alex's hand in hers kept her steady. "Victoria," Alex continued, "you and Richard came here thinking you could destroy my business and my happiness like you did 2 years ago. But you made a mistake. You underestimated both Hope and me. This time, you won't win." At that moment, a group of police officers entered the restaurant, led by an officer who walked directly to Richard. "Mr. Sterling, you are under arrest for fraud, bribery, and falsification of official documents." It turned out that Alex, with the help of a private investigator, had been gathering evidence about Richard's illegal activities for months. The bribed inspector was also arrested, and Victoria suddenly found herself alone, surrounded by people who looked at her with disgust and contempt. "This isn't over yet," Victoria murmured to Alex as she left the restaurant, but her threat sounded hollow and desperate. When the commotion subsided, Charles Morgan stood up and raised his glass of wine. "To Chef Hope Miller, who has reminded us tonight that true greatness comes from the heart, not from titles or certificates." The toast was unanimous, but Hope barely heard it. She was looking at Alex, who had mentioned a marriage proposal in front of all these people. "Were you serious?" she whispered. Alex smiled, that genuine smile she had learned to love, and knelt down in the middle of the restaurant full of food critics, famous chefs, and cameras. "Hope Miller," he said, pulling a small blue velvet box from his pocket, "you have filled my life with flavor, with love, with hope. Before I met you, I was a bitter man who had lost faith in everything good. You gave me back the ability to love, to trust, to dream. Would you marry me?" The ring was perfect, an elegant but not ostentatious solitaire, surrounded by small emeralds that matched her green eyes. Hope looked around the room filled with people waiting for her answer. Then she looked at her grandmother, Ruth, who had tears in her eyes and was nodding vigorously. And finally she looked at Alex, kneeling in front of her with his heart in his eyes. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes." The entire restaurant erupted in applause as Alex stood up and kissed her passionately. Amid the hubbub and celebration, Hope heard Ruth's voice shouting over the noise. "It's about time. I thought I'd have to wait until I was 90 to see my granddaughter married." 6 months later, Hope and Alex got married in a small but beautiful ceremony in the restaurant's garden, decorated with the same marigolds from the event that had changed their lives. Ruth officiated the ceremony, as was tradition in Oregon, and Julia Jones prepared the wedding banquet along with Paul. The Golden Gate Grill had become the most famous restaurant in the city, not only for its exceptional food, but for the love story that had been born within its walls. Hope had opened a school for traditional cooking on the 2nd floor, where she taught young chefs the secrets she had learned from Ruth. On their wedding night, as they danced slowly in the garden lit by colored lights, Alex murmured in Hope's ear, "Did you ever imagine we would end up here when you accepted my challenge that first night?" Hope smiled, remembering the scared and vulnerable woman she had been just a few months before. "No," she replied, "but I think my heart knew before my mind. Since that first night, I knew you were going to change my life, and you saved mine," he murmured, gently twirling her. "You taught me that true love isn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone who makes you want to be the best version of yourself." Ruth, who was watching them from a nearby table, smiled and raised her glass of punch to the starry sky. "To all the women who have loved with courage," she murmured, "and to the men wise enough to recognize that love when they find it." In the restaurant kitchen, now silent after the celebration, the cookbook from Grandmother Rose lay open to the page for the BBQ pulled pork that had started it all. Next to it, Hope had placed a new recipe she had been developing, United Hearts, a chocolate and chipotle dessert that represented the perfect fusion of sweetness and passion, of tradition and modernity, of two souls who had found their home in each other's love. Years later, when Hope and Alex had 3 children running around the restaurant and Ruth was still directing the kitchen at 85, customers still asked about the story of the place, and they always received the same answer. This is the place where a woman who believed she didn't deserve to be seen found a man who saw her for exactly who she was, extraordinary, and where they both learned that true love isn't about finding someone who completes you, but about finding someone with whom you can build a complete life.